Not far from the Jesusa Gate and the walls of the old city, there's a place where the view becomes unexpectedly rural. The roads, choked with dust and bounded by tall hedgerows, begin to narrow from a single lane to a passable walking trail. Locals share the path with flocks of sheep, happy to follow the directionally confident goats or the occasional vocal command from an ever-vigilant shepherd. It is not an uncommon sight. Much of India's wool production is derived from Bikaner and the surrounding areas in the northwest state of Rajasthan. Over the decades, little has changed. And if it weren't for the Western clothing or an occasional car horn, it might be difficult to ascertain time or place. For a handmade rug, this is where it all begins. Once a year, before the heat and humidity become almost unbearable, shepherds tend to the shearing of their flocks. The wool, now long, strong, and high in oil content, is ideal for producing the beautiful sheen or luster so reminiscent of fine hand-knotted rugs. Tradition often dictates events, in that initial wool preparation is handled almost entirely by women, and considerable time and effort is expended to that end. Practiced hands, warmed by the early morning sun, tease the wool. Fingers opening the fibers, pausing occasionally to remove excess dust and debris. To guarantee quality, rug producers often choose to blend wools from Argentina and New Zealand with the finest of Indian wools, known as chocolate. Blending and washing are usually repeated with the addition of soap oil to promote strength and softness. Highly coveted handmade rugs abandon fast, efficient, noisy machines in favor of a simple and somewhat quieter device. By modern standards, it's a rudimentary contraption, a reliable, uncomplicated companion demanding skill and dexterity from the operator, who must strive to keep tension in the twist by pulling against the spindle and drawing out the carded wool in a high arcing motion. Hand spinning dates back thousands of years, although when and where the technique was developed has never been determined. Hand-spun wool produces an uneven or nubby surface to the rug, the human factor inadvertently creating a yarn that is tighter in some places and looser in others. Accordingly, the absorption of colored dyes is uneven, less color in the tighter places and more in the loosely spun areas. Although the age-old craft of hand spinning is currently enjoying a newfound resurgence, high-quality hand-spun rugs are relatively rare and are therefore considered more valuable, commanding premium prices. Production of cotton is much the same and is used for the composition of the warp and the weft of a rug. Finally, the yarn is separated from the spindles and placed in bundles for weighing and dyeing. Hand spinning produces less than 5 pounds of yarn per person per day. Because the spinning and dyeing processes are closely connected, it is perhaps at this early stage that the desired characteristics of the finished carpet become a consideration. That is to say, choice becomes a factor. To maintain the more traditional or homespun look often associated with village or tribal rugs, vegetable dyes such as saffron, indigo, madder root, and even tree bark must be prepared. Once the only colouring method, it is both time-consuming and costly to locate and gather natural substances not always available in significant amounts. A fine ground powder, resplendent in colour and texture, is the desired result and must meet the exacting standards of the dye master. After initial preparation, the rhythmic tapping of the hardwood mortar and pestle accedes to the monotone grinding of the heavy stone wheel, which completes the task. Then, like tea or coffee, water is added and the mixture must be allowed to brew or steep. To ensure permanence in the colour of the yarn, it is first dipped into a solution of alum or iron. The dye will now be able to permanently bond to the wool fibres. As soon as the appropriate colour mix is ready, the bundles of wool are submerged into the vats of dye in accordance with predetermined parameters of time and temperature. Because some natural substances produce less permanence than others, it is sometimes necessary to repeat the procedure more than once to obtain a satisfactory shade. Knowledge and correct handling produces wonderful results. But vegetable dye specialists are a rare breed in India today, and dye masters must pass on vast quantities of accumulated knowledge to apprentices if the art is to survive. As an employee of one of the largest natural dye companies in Jaipur, dye master Ramzan Ji has been perfecting his craft for more than 50 years. Natural dye producers are restricted to small batch dyeing because variables found in nature and species of plant indigenous to certain regions virtually guarantee that no two mixes yield the same results. Once the source of the colour has been used up, the bundles of wool and ultimately the rugs, despite best efforts, will not look the same. Colour recipes are passed down from generation to generation. They have been altered, reworked and improved upon through experimentation, inspiration and trial and error. Nevertheless, individual batch results are both unpredictable and inconsistent. Natural dyes, although initially very bright, soften with time, aging beautifully without really changing or losing their luster. Their vibrant colour resists running when wet, and long-term exposure to sunlight does not cause significant fading. Once again turning to Mother Nature, the successfully dyed bundles are left out in the sun to dry, where they are occasionally turned. Unlike their traditional cousins, synthetic or chemical chrome dyes are created in the lab to exact measurements. Precise amounts of color are calculated, weighed and recorded in the knowledge that, should it be desired, a consistent color palette can be reproduced again and again. There are other advantages to chrome dyes. They exist in abundance, are much easier to work with, and providing the correct formula can be worked out, allow the recreation of just about any color or shade of color. In comparison, natural dyes are time-consuming, less cooperative, and simply cannot produce certain colors. Even with synthetic dyes, it has not always been plain sailing. First developed in the 1860s, they bled in water and faded or changed color over time. By the turn of the 20th century, aniline dyes, despite performing poorly, had begun to enjoy more widespread use. By the 1930s, chemical chrome dyes yielded even better results, and today's generation of synthetics demonstrate none of the early teething problems. Chemical chrome dyes are ideal for multiple copies of rugs in differing sizes. When used, they suggest a more formal, symmetrically finished look. Abrash, a term meaning different bands or shades of the same color running across a rug, was once an indication of small batch dyeing, most commonly thought to be associated with natural dyes. However, both synthetic and natural dyes can be produced in small batches. Therefore, the intentional use of abrash in chrome-dyed rugs may suggest an older, more homespun or rural feeling. Before weaving begins, a design rendering, sometimes called a cartoon or naksha, must be created. Usually drawn freehand on graph paper, each square represents a single knot. More than just a shape and a color pattern, the naksha indicates to the weavers the type and quality of rug to be produced. Any variation requires the drawing and painting of an additional cartoon, also copied by hand. Design resources are many and varied. Sometimes inspiration is drawn from an existing naksha. Sometimes from the creative imagination of the designer. Perhaps adding a delicate Persian pattern or an intricate European motif. Today, buyers from all over the world strongly influence the design and color elements of hand-knotted rugs. And even the trends seen in today's fashion and home textile industries often have a strong bearing on rug manufacturing. Once the rug is completed, designs are stored and catalogued for further reference. Remarkably, despite being firmly entrenched in a computer-age society, hand-drawn, hand-painted and hand-copied is still the most common method of Naksha creation. Rugs are woven on looms of various sizes, the width of the loom dictating the width of the rug. Despite the simplistic, antiquated look, the frame is robust enough to support the warp and weft strings of varying tension for the entire time the rug is secured to the loom. Preparation requires a great deal of precision and patience, as literally thousands of warp strings must be painstakingly placed in position. Together with the weft strings, the warp strings form the physical foundation or skeletal structure of the forthcoming rug. Cotton is the fibre of choice for the backing of the rug due to its uniform shrinkage when washed. Traditional weaving techniques have been traced back almost 3,000 years. The type of knots used relate directly to a specific region or ethnic group, the obvious examples being a Persian knot or a Turkish knot. Interpretation or translation of the design from the Naksha also varies from place to place. In Jaipur, the capital of Rajasthan, for example, it is typical for the master weaver at the loom to chant out rhythmically the specific color to be woven at a precise moment. Harmonious sound and motion create a spiritual reverence akin to a religious ceremony. The apparent effortless way in which the knots are formed is deceiving to the untrained eye. Knots are tied individually by hand around 2 warp threads, followed by a flick of the hook knife to separate the trailing yarn. Despite appearances to the contrary, the forming of the knots is not arbitrary. The action is precise and exact. A practiced, skilled master weaver can tie upwards of 30 knots per minute, although accuracy rather than pace is the ultimate objective. When seen in slow motion, it is easy to see why the formation of a single knot requires dexterity and concentration. However, because nimble fingers repeat the action correctly thousands of times, it is as much about feel as it is sight as the procedure becomes second nature. Tying the knot to the rug's foundation is what differentiates handmade carpets from any other type of rug. Machine-made rugs merely pass the thread through or glue it to the base. Moreover, they are handmade for reasons of necessity as much as aesthetics. This may also explain the durability and longevity enjoyed by a hand-knotted rug, the pile remaining intact until the foundation becomes worn through. Man, in all his wisdom, has yet to invent a machine that is able to tie a knot on a rug. Between every row of knots, a weft string, usually made of either cotton or wool, is horizontally threaded through alternate warp strings. Although its primary purpose is to keep the knots in place, the packing down of the knots row after row actually forms the direction of the pile. On a vertical loom, the pile always faces downwards. The essential design of the carpet is carried in the pile. After several rows have been completed, the excess wool is trimmed off and the creative cycle begins again. Large quality rugs often take considerable time to produce. A 9x12 may take 4 weavers up to a year to complete. Flat weave rugs differentiate themselves by being woven on horizontal looms using a simpler knotting technique. The flat weave is notable for its lower knot count, broad patterns and rougher texture. With universal appeal and an increase in popularity, flat weaves provide a viable and economical alternative to hand-knotted pile rugs. When a rug is finally cut off the loom, it is by no means finished. The raw rug is extremely dense and the pile is uneven. It is often skewed or crooked because removing tension on the rug also allows the knots to space or separate slightly, a condition which requires correction. Again, and not for the last time, the rug is placed under tension, this time horizontally. The giant adjustable hooks at each end maintain rigidity, which in turn allows a better access to the pile. A fine pointed instrument is inserted between the rows and the loose knots are tapped or guided down the wall. As you can see, the interwoven weft from the row above is actually the contact point, not the knots directly below. Every knot must be repositioned and realigned in order to maintain a high standard. The greater part of all rug production in India today requires that the rug's edges are woven with a little excess width. This enables the sides to be trimmed off and then finished in such a way as to allow the carpet to lay straight on the floor. Known as the selvage binding, it is usually finished with an appropriately matching yarn. Although taking a blowtorch to a fine hand-knotted rug may seem somewhat extreme, it is common practice to singe the reverse side of the carpet in order to remove loose fibers and any excess wool. The movement of the flame is constant to prevent damage to the rug. Washing a newly woven rug involves compressing the soaking wet pile with wooden paddles. The scraping action, often done in unison, is similar to using a chamois leather cloth. The soapy water is removed along with dust, dirt and debris. The synchronous action of the washerman is symbolic, the movement breathing life into the rug. The process is repeated, sometimes using a conditioner that helps untangle hand-spun wool fibers, sometimes using clean water to remove unused soap. Yet again, the sun's natural drying capability is employed. Larger rugs sometimes taking several days to dry. Attention now turns to the rough, uneven pile, which must be trimmed to a consistent height. Clipping the pile is usually performed in stages and in combination with several other techniques, often with washings in between. Opening up the pile requires the use of a long, thin instrument pointed at one end. The point catches the entangled tufts, forcing them to stand straight up, ready for cutting or combing. The Hindi word bokai summarizes the procedure. Barai, another Hindi word, meaning penciling or separating of the colors with a fine metal instrument, follows. Finally, the rug is combed vigorously to remove the excess yarn fibers. Perhaps now, for the first time, after thousands of hours of work, the true beauty of the rug is revealed. As the final product begins to evolve, several finishing steps designed to shape the rug ensue. Because cotton and wool are susceptible to shrinkage, the rugs must again be held under tension. The washing and natural drying of the rug causes the knots to tighten and thus alter the rug's size and shape. The anchored hooks are inserted in close proximity to maintain an even strain all round, then tightened and retightened over the course of several days, gradually stretching the rug into shape. If performed correctly, the rug will lay completely flat on the floor, allowing any last adjustments to pattern, edge or pile. At the top and bottom, the last few knots are sewn together to prevent any fallout, and the cotton ends are removed, in effect lengthening the fringe. The warp strings at each end that form the fringes are finally tied, usually an indication that the rug is close to completion. Like the weaving of the knots, the work is meticulous. Again, slender, nimble fingers are the ideal criteria. so women are often employed, sitting side by side. The initial inspection of the rug may reveal the need to comb out, clip, or open the pile further. If the buyer has requested a specific attribute, the rug may need to be aged or re-washed. Before exportation, however, a more formal inspection is required. In order to meet the exacting standards of the buyer, the rug is checked for quality, weave and finish. Attaching the seal symbolizes approval. Paperwork matching the rug's number for customs and export purposes is filled out. Finished rugs are finally packed and marked for shipment to destinations across the globe. It could be said that handmade rugs are themselves interwoven into the very fabric of society in India. And like the sacred river Ganges, they play a profound role in everyday life. They are both symbols of India's age-long culture and civilization, ever changing and yet ever the same.